Good morning, and thank you all for joining us for today's Total Attorneys Power Chat. We're here with Total Attorneys Vice President Tim Ryan, talking about hiring for your law firm, minimizing cost and maximizing talent. And Tim, can you tell us a little bit about yourself today?
Mm-hmm. My name is Tim Ryan, and I'm the Vice President here at Total Attorneys. Been with the company for about 5.5 years now. The company is almost 8 years old, so a good majority of the time that we've been in business, I've been around doing what I can to help it grow. Before that, I was working for a company called MPR, which really espouses a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about today in human capital management. Before that, I worked in sales at Icon Office Solutions, and I attended the University of Illinois in Chicago.
Thank you. And some general housekeeping information for today. If you have a question during the session, you can always email powerchathelp@totalattorneys.com. Twitter your questions to @TotalAnswers or #PowerChat. And technical issues, you can also email powerchathelp@totalattorneys.com, and someone will jump in right away. So we're going to get started today with people who determine the success or failure of your business. And Tim, I'll let you go ahead and jump into that.
Mm-hmm. You know, over the years we've had the benefit of talking to a lot of small business owners, particularly attorneys who are either solo practitioners or they have a couple of support people, and even in some cases, some attorneys have got a number of associates and a number of support staff with them. You know, the primary area that we work with in terms of the legal sector is with small to mid-sized law firms. So over the years when we've chatted with owners and operators, almost all of them will agree that their most important asset is their people. And I think that's kind of a no-brainer just because, you know, a law firm or a company of any type is nothing if not the people that comprise that organization. Now, as much as people will sort of talk of saying that, yes, people are our most important asset, we believe in that wholeheartedly, typically the actions that they take don't support that statement. You know, I would submit to you that more time is spent going over what the new type of copier you should buy for your office would be than time spent in developing a behavioral benchmark for who you need in a particular position, interviewing that person, and finding them and getting them up and running within your company. So, you know, I don't think that's a result of people not caring about the process. Clearly, I think they do believe in the value of people, but it's just one of those things that a lot of entrepreneurs don't really get any sort of training on when they decide to go out and open their business. You know, you've got folks who are just naturals at it, a person you could call, I guess, an unconscious competent. They know how to interview, they know how to select the right people, and if you ask them how they do it, they'd probably say, I just know. And then there's the rest of us who have, you know, some trouble doing it and trying to get to the real meat of who is this person? What can they do for our law firm? Are they the right fit? So today I really want to talk about how we can invest in the hiring process, because there are certain tactics and strategies that you can employ as a business owner who's trying to grow their practice with people that are going to increase your chances of having that person work out and be a positive producer for the organization. Because essentially you're going to spend this money one way or the other. And we're going to get into that, but what I mean is essentially you either spend the time investing in the hiring process or spend the time paying out on the back end when you've got people who are less than the best. So one of the first things that I really want to focus on is when we talk about the cost of a poor hire. And certainly I think, you know, everyone can agree that making a hiring mistake will hit the bottom line, but I don't think people have a healthy enough appreciation of just how big that financial impact is. So when we say recruitment costs, think about the time spent in hours by either your HR person, manager, perhaps it's your time, anybody that's involved in the interviewing process that's going to schedule that interview, sit down with this person and spend an hour or two with them over a couple of weeks. Maybe you're interviewing a couple candidates. If you multiply what those people earn by the hours that they spend doing it, we've already invested quite a bit. Not to mention the cost of the ad, or if you offer a referral bonus to employees for referring people, or in some cases if you're in a pinch and you need to hire a headhunter, the cost of placement is dramatic. And really that's just to get us in the door. All that does is get us the applicant flow and some interviews. That person hasn't even started with us. We already spent that money just to find them. Now then, once we bring them on, clearly benefits and salary are the obvious expense, but it doesn't really stop there, because when you bring someone on, there's naturally a ramp-up time where they learn your processes, they learn the methodologies involved with working at your law firm, but someone has to train that individual. So again, we're talking about not only a manager's time or your time spent with them to get them up and running, but also if there's any sort of training and development or administrative time that needs to go into it. And that could be software learning, it could be seminars or something like that. And again, we're paying out just to get someone in a position to make a difference for the company. And naturally, if you start to see that this individual doesn't have the right stuff, they can't do the job, they won't do the job, whatever the case may be, now we start hitting the bottom line in softer costs, but very real ways. You know, the startup performance is less than standard. The impact that bringing somebody on, it really hits morale of your other coworkers when they wonder what's going on with this person, and that individual slows them down. And then, you know, it has an effect in terms of the standards of performance throughout the organization, or just attendance lowered and things like that. Now, the worst one to me, the worst expense, and this is a very real one when we're talking particularly about a law firm, is lost business. You know, if we're talking about, let's say, two common positions in a law firm, be it like a support type of paralegal or administrative person or an associate, you know, in either case, lost business or opportunities lost, prospects lost, customers lost because they were handled ineffectively, they weren't given the attention that they needed, or you know, you simply didn't answer the phone the right way, even though you're paying marketing dollars to generate these phone calls from interested consumers. You only get one bite at the apple. So if you've got someone who cannot or will not do the job well in their roles as either an associate or administrative person, the biggest and worst cost that you're going to face is lost opportunity. Every time someone doesn't hire you as a result of their bad work, that hits the bottom line as well. Now let's just also talk about other costs, like, I don't know, you know, depends on the firm, but certainly some people will do laptops or a cell phone as part of compensation package. You know, if in fact your managers have to spend a ton of time dealing with someone pretty poor, that's also going to hit the bottom line. And then, you know, in worse situations, you know, when you got to terminate that person, there may be unemployment compensation. You may have to allow for severance packages, or in some cases, if it wasn't done right or something like that, you could be facing legal fees. And so when you total all this up, basically the short equation for it is you take a person's salary, and if that person does not work out, that mistake costs you 3 times that person's salary. So if we're talking about an administrative person making $40,000 a year, if we hire that individual and find out that they don't work in, say, 6 to 9 months or something like that, that costs you and your firm $120,000 minimum. Minimum. So think about that. You know, and that doesn't even touch the fact that there might be opportunity lost in the form of clients you didn't get or clients that you lost as a result of poor handling. Now then, let's think about an associate. What if that associate's making, say, $60,000 a year? It's a $180,000 mistake. And the worst part, I think, about making these mistakes, paying for these mistakes, is the fact that at the end of the day, you have to start over. You have to go and start over and try to find the right person again, and risk that same amount of money on making a hiring mistake. So if that isn't motivation to spend the money and the time up front, I don't know what it is. So that's when we say investing up front, and whether you're going to pay up front or on the back, you know, you're going to pay. I submit to you that it's going to be much cheaper on the front end. You know, so do it now. Make sure that you do it right. And to get an idea of how to do it, let's just take a look at the hiring process as it is today. Now, when you think about most hiring situations, either when you've tried to get a job or when you've hired people, perhaps friends and colleagues that have been in a similar position, I think the average hiring process probably works something along the lines of, let's post an ad, let's see if we can get some people to respond to it, let's see if we can get some folks in here for interviews. So what do? We get a bunch of resumes, and we start sorting them into a yes pile, a no pile, and a maybe pile. So the no's we're not going to interview. The maybes we'll maybe look at again. The yeses we schedule some interviews. And then that day rolls around when the interview is there. Your assistant gives you a buzz and says, hey, Mr. So-and-so is here. You flip through papers randomly all over your desk wondering what client file it is when you remember that it's actually an interview for a position. So you grab the resume, you go through it really quickly, you try to think of some questions to answer, figure, I'll have a conversation with this person and see if I can get to know them a little bit. And then, you know, they come into your office, and what do? We take a look at that resume, and we ask questions based almost purely on experience. Where did you go to school? I went to this particular Big Ten university. Oh, I went to a Big Ten university. How'd you like it? Oh, I loved it. And you'll talk a little bit about college, and that's good. And it'll develop a little bit of rapport. I think there's some value to focusing on experience in the beginning of an interview because, when you're asking people questions about their experience, this is stuff that they know. So it kind of puts them at ease. They can answer a couple questions and that. But I don't think it really tells you anything. If you ask a group of people to raise their hands in a room of, say, 100 people, how many people do you think lie on resumes? I'd say probably 100 hands will go up. But then if you ask who lies on your resume, all those hands will go down. So we're talking about the resume, is basically a balance sheet without liabilities on it. So we're only looking at a very filtered version of who this person is. And if the interview stops at looking just at that experience, just at that balance sheet without liabilities on it, you're doing yourself and your organization a disservice. And like I say, it's a good place to start, but it certainly isn't the only place you should be asking a question. Really, what you should be focusing on is talent and chemistry. Now, when we refer to talent, we'll say it's the behaviors that make someone great at their job. Now, when we put talent first, we can focus on who this person is, not what the job is. A lot of times we start with a job description, and that's good. That's a good place to start. But you're not hiring jobs. You're hiring people. So without a people description, it's a half-baked cake. So let's talk about the people description in terms of both talent and chemistry. Now, talent, like I said, are the behaviors that make someone great. And we'll use a well-accepted definition of behavior to say what motivates a person, how do they think, how do they act, and how do they interact with other people. And when we take a look at that and start to describe the person in those contexts, we're starting to get to the behaviors that we need to be successful on the job. And that's how we start to build behavioral benchmarks. The next thing that we look at is chemistry. And now chemistry is really important, and it's a little bit more obvious. Now, certainly you got to be careful because people on the interview are also on their best behavior. They're trying to make you like them enough to offer them a job. So it's not enough to just spend an hour with that person. You probably should take them to lunch. You should probably let your staff meet with them because, let's face it, most of our waking hours are spent in the office, away from family, away from friends. And the people that we're doing that with have got to be at least the bare minimum people that we can tolerate. It'd be much better if we liked them. At Total Attorneys here, chemistry and culture is so important that we put it at the top of the list just because it's our belief that if we've got a great culture and we've got great people who are happy to come to work, it's no surprise that we put out great products and have happy customers on the other side of it. I think those two things translate. So chemistry is incredibly important. It's a great thing to involve some of your other staff if you're making decisions like that. And if you're going to give on anything, give on experience. I mean, how many of you know somebody that can just pick something up? Didn't need a lot of training. I would submit to you that even in some cases, experience can actually have a negative impact because people are coming to you with bad habits that they picked up at other law firms. So we found people that don't necessarily have a lot of experience in a particular role, but the talent and the chemistry to do it blossom into that role and really take it on and take it home and do really well with it. But the traditional hiring methods don't focus on that. All we focus on is experience. So we have to change that. We have to start looking at things a little bit differently so that we can make a more effective selection decision. Essentially what I'm talking about is turning the process upside down. Now look to the right of the screen that we're talking about right now. The traditional method, if you look at the bottom of it, is we don't spend a lot of time creating any sort of behavioral benchmark. We don't know who the person is. We just know what the job requires. So we use that job description. We do interviews focused only on experience, and then we bring the person on. And naturally there's a ramp-up time where they learn how things are done in your office, get the lay of the land. And then typically, if that person was brought on and they don't have the right stuff, you start to notice some behaviors that are pretty negative. So what do? We coach, we counsel, we sit with the person, try to help them get to the next level. We should work with them. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that as a manager. In fact, that's the job of managers. But a manager should be able to recognize when their efforts are just being simply thrown down the well. I don't think behavior changes, and at least not by the time you're an adult in the workforce. Perhaps when you're children you can mold somebody, but let's say anybody who's over the age of 18 or 21 or whenever they come to work for you, who they are is fairly well established. And even if you could change their behaviors, I think it's a complete waste of management time to try to do that. For those folks listening that have people working with them or worked in other environments with a lot of other people, have you ever known someone where managers have consistently got to sit down with them to tell them to be nice or be friendlier or be a little bit more open? And you might see a change for a week or two, but it never affects a long-term difference. And yet the manager will continue to try to work with these people. And then the 80-20 rule starts to come into play, where your top manager is spending 80% of their time with the bottom 20% of your people, trying to get them to be something they're not. So get out of the behavior modification business and get into the behavior selection business. If you look back on the left side there, the recommended approach is quite the opposite. Let's spend the time up front to create a behavioral benchmark so we understand who we want in this position as well as what they need to do in it. And then let's spend the time to interview them more than once, to have them meet with some of our staff to make sure that the chemistry is right. This definitely takes a longer time, but it will prove itself on the back end. You know, around Total Attorneys, we have a mantra that we just say hire slowly and fire quickly. Because if someone can or won't do the job, this shouldn't be a part of your future. The best way to measure that is before they start, not after. So create the behavioral benchmarks, spend the time doing the interviews, have them meet your staff, make sure that both the talent and the chemistry are exactly in line with where they need to be. So I've been using the term behavioral benchmarking, and I think it's time to clarify exactly what I mean by that. A behavioral benchmark is essentially a blueprint for the person that we need in this role. And there are 4 basic areas that we want to focus on. So to make it real world, let's just take a position that is commonly hired for in law firms, of say an administrative person to kind of office manage, answer some phones, perhaps do some creation of documents for you and things like that. Now, the best place to start before you start hiring someone is to think about the role and think about someone that you knew, either who works for you currently or perhaps you worked with in another job, maybe even the person's you, that was the best at this particular role, the person that, if you could, you would clone them tomorrow. So let's start to think about that person, a real person first, and try to understand what motivates that person. Why do they get up in the morning? What makes them come to work in the first place? You know, my background has been in sales, and a lot of times what I think often defines good salespeople is an achiever trait. Someone who is motivated by independence, by recognition, either financial or company-wide types of things, and that's someone who's going to be driven to succeed, driven to make a name for themselves. You know, there's also motivations for someone in this role, like a mission of service. You know, someone in administrative law, let's say, that's going to be answering a lot of phone calls and talking to your clients, and their primary role is to make sure your appointments come in and to set those appointments. I think we need someone who's motivated to help people. It's not just about making phone calls and setting appointments and times. You want someone on the phone who feels like, I can help this person out. Clearly they need it. They're panicked. You know, a lot of times when someone reaches out to a law firm, they've probably let their situation go for a little while and are a little bit nervous now and anxious and want to talk to somebody, want to know that there's help out there. That first line of defense, being your admin person, should be able to handle that. But what motivates someone like that? It's probably a genuine concern for other people. Now let's also talk about modes of thinking, and let's describe that. When you're thinking about that best person in that role, try to describe how their mind works when they get handed a task. Not before they do, before they do something, before they go interact with other people or anything like this. How does your mind parse the task into reasonable chunks? What happens when you get handed to something? For us here at Total Attorneys, and I would submit that this is a valuable trait across the board, the primary trait that we look for in someone's modes of thinking is what we refer to as discerner. For lack of a better term, that's just street smarts. Someone who has the ability to sort what matters from what doesn't. You know, knowing the right thing to say at the right time, and more importantly, what not to say and who not to say that to. That natural ability to sort, or street smarts, is absolutely critical in every single position in this organization. I would say it's critical for just about anybody in any organization, but you probably want to take a look at how does this person need to sort this stuff out? How does their mind need to work? And then go into modes of acting. when they have the task given to them, what do they do next? Is it someone in your office who is required to be really proactive, to be looking for new things to do, looking for work, coming to you and saying, hey, I thought of this, I can get this done? Or is there so much work that it requires organization within your office that it's about keeping things orderly? Maybe you need someone who's a real strategic thinker instead, and then can actually go out and clearly take care of the task in an organized fashion. Think about how you want them to actually do the job. Think about how that person in that role did that job, and then describe it to the best of your ability. Literally what I'm talking about is you sitting down in a quiet area with a legal pad, describing what motivates that person, how they think, how they act, and then lastly, how they interact with people. This kind of relates to that chemistry thing that we were talking about, and I think that you should take into account the culture of your office when you start looking at modes of interaction. If you've got the type of office where everyone's really assertive, everyone's really intense, then you want to make sure that this person can match up to that. If you've got an office that's really friendly, really laid back, you want to make sure that that person's going to be able to fit in there. Maybe it's some mix of the two, but think about it in the context of the culture and what someone's going to need to fit in. And in some cases, if you're running into a little writer's block, think about the opposites. Think about what definitely won't work, and not just the clear stuff, like someone comes in like a buzz, but I mean the subtle things. If you're having trouble thinking about how to know what you don't want. And from those examples, tell me about a time you went, in particular, just because it's a simple one, and like a lot of behaviorally based questions, we're asking someone for a specific example of how they acted in a specific situation. And this will sort the wheat from the chaff simply because people who don't have the right behaviors will usually give you some really nice answer that doesn't amount to anything. So if I were to ask somebody to say, tell me about a time you went the extra mile for a customer, and I said, well, I always go the extra mile for a customer because if I don't do it, somebody else will do it. And if somebody else does it, then we're going to lose that customer, and that's not good business. Well, clearly that sounds like a real nice answer, but it's just a lot of BS because what I asked that person was to tell me about a time when you went the extra mile. I don't want philosophy. I don't want theory. I want practical application. So that answer doesn't give me anything. But an answer that does is, for instance, tell me about a time you went the extra mile for a customer. Well, there was this one time my customer told me they were going to call me at 3:30. They had a potential order. They weren't sure. I waited around until 5:30 before when they finally made the call. They needed a part for a last-minute run. I took it over there. They ended up making the run, and it was a small account, but it grew into a much larger account over my time that I was there. Well, that's pretty much a dynamite answer. This is someone saying that this is exactly what I did in this situation and the impact that it had. People who have the right behaviors act this way naturally. So while it may take them a second to come up with an example, the example is sort of the litmus test that you're looking for to say, does this person have what it takes? So again, come up with your description. Use those descriptions to come up with some open-ended and situational types of questions, and then look for examples, not theory, in their answers. So when you're doing that, you can start to get to the bottom of who this person is, so that when you bring them on, you can get them up and running, and their chances of hitting the ground running are much, much more improved than they would have been if you hadn't done these types of things. Experience is important, but the focus should be on talent and chemistry, and behavioral benchmarks are your way to doing that. Now, even if you do all that, you're going to make mistakes. We're humans. There's no bulletproof system for anybody to do this. I would love to tell you that in my tenure here at Total Attorneys, every hiring decision I made was a great one. That's simply not true. I think my batting average is pretty good because we do build behavioral benchmarks. We do focus on chemistry and culture. But ultimately, like I said, there's no bulletproof system. So it'll increase your chances dramatically if you can do this type of thing to build the behavioral benchmarks and actually use and apply them. It'll greatly improve your chances of getting someone that's the right person. But if that person is not the right individual, you need to act quickly. And this is really at the heart of the hire slowly and fire quickly. Sometimes we don't want to fire somebody because of our own ego. I hired them, I think they can do it, I believe in them. And that may just be because we don't want to have some egg on our face and say that, yeah, I made a mistake, this person isn't the right one. In some cases, it comes from a good place. Maybe it's just not the ego, but we genuinely want to help them. We genuinely think we can do it. But, if someone over a period of months consistently cannot meet the goals and objectives that you want for them to reach, instead of trying to coach and counsel away the negative behaviors that you're seeing, you just have to take the action and let that person go. It's not easy. It's not preferred. Nobody likes doing it. But you have to remember that you're running a business. You're building a business. You're not building a community. So even if someone's nice, they can't stay. And that's why we really, again, I'm hammering a little bit on this talent, experience, and chemistry angle, because if you focus on someone, let's say, who's got all the experience but none of the talent and chemistry, they come in, they're a total dud. You got to fire that person. But what happens if you get someone with all the right experience and the right culture but no real talent? Well, now we have a real problem because everybody likes the individual. They just can't do the job. They're totally useless, but everyone loves them because they bring donuts on Fridays or something like that, so that when you have to terminate that person, now you're the bad guy. I can't believe they fired Charlie, threw him out in the cold. That's so terrible. So it's more than just the bottom line that hits. It's the impact on your whole team. And likewise, even if you get someone who's talented as the day is long, great experience, but no chemistry with the organization, that individual will likely leave you before you get the full use that you want out of them, or you'll have to fire them because the rest of your staff will be up in arms. So recognizing that these bad hires happen and being able to identify where the gap is, if it's a talent gap, if it's a chemistry gap, I don't think you're going to solve that. If it's an experience gap, you might have a chance. But recognize that no one does this perfectly, and that when it happens, you've got to take action quickly, because if you don't, the high costs associated with delay are as bad or worse than the ones that we talked about for making a hiring mistake. Now, let's take a look at that actually a little. We'll call it the cost of procrastination, essentially. If you hold on to a low-level performer, it starts to make mediocre levels of productivity okay in the company. And then you've also got managers wasting their time trying to change the individuals. We waste money in training programs trying to improve their level of performance. Management starts to look like they don't got their heads screwed on straight, because people are wondering how someone with no talent or it doesn't particularly fit the culture not only got on board, but stays on board. It starts to make you look like you don't know how to run their business. And then, like I talked about earlier, there's a possible loss of customers or prospects, and poor performers drag down top performers. That's just as simple as it gets. So in this case, I would estimate that it costs 2 to 3 times the salary of that person times the number of people that you have that aren't living up to your expectations. So again, you probably made the hiring mistakes associated to get this person on. That's okay. It's costing you money. But don't let it continue to cost you money. Don't let it continue to put your organization at risk. So take the action that you need to, as unpleasant as it may be. It is a part of doing business, and it's just something that has to happen in some cases. So really, it's kind of a good time to actually look at that. I think if you ever hired somebody, you've probably been in a situation where you made a mistake. You've probably been in a situation where it worked out great. And, when we reflect today on hiring for attorneys, the big question should always start, do I need to hire this person? For me, it always starts on a managerial level to say that as a manager, if there's something that I do that someone else can be doing, they probably should be. And most of the attorneys that we've worked with over the years, be they solo practitioners or managing partners of large regional firms, that what they need to focus on is, should I be doing this stuff? Most of the attorneys that we work with who are kind of leaders in their organization are great at applying and interpreting the law for their clients. They're great at getting their clients to sign up with their law firm. This is what they do best. They make rain, and they continue to expand the client's moves with the firm. In some cases, you maybe cross-market and get PI cases from a bankruptcy case or divorce case from bankruptcy case or something like that. So generating business may be what these folks are best at, yet they spend tons of time answering phones or preparing petitions or doing some of these other things. So start there as a manager and ask yourself, can somebody else be doing this? If the answer is yes, then they should be. Now the question is to you, should we be hiring this person as a full-time staff member? Can we do this part-time, or can we outsource it? And truly, that really depends on the task that you're looking at, and also taking an honest look at who you are. If you know that you're not the type of person who wants to manage a lot of people or get involved with that type of thing, then you may need to either hire a manager to do it, or you should consider outsourcing some stuff. Now, in the legal community, there's all kinds of options for outsourcing, more than small practitioners and I think are aware of. There's some, I think, feeling in the marketplace that outsourcing is just for the big guys and the really large firms with a lot of resources, and that's actually not true. There's a lot of great small entrepreneurial companies across the nation that are starting all sorts of programs that would have an immediate impact on that attorney's practice. So it also requires identifying what are those tasks. Am I okay with letting them go? It will involve a thorough investigation into who's going to be providing these services for you. But it may just be that hiring isn't the answer. Outsourcing could be. That decision has to be made up front. If you make the decision to outsource, then you want to actually investigate what are my options, who are the providers, get all your questions and ducks in a row to see what they can do, and give them a test run. And when I say a test run, not just something that's, once or twice, but give them a period of months to become part of your business process. And if it works, keep doing it. If not, let's revisit the decision and either go back to an alternative outsourcing company or, again, reconsider bringing someone in on a full-time basis. So the upside of outsourcing, obviously, is that someone else makes the investment in finding the right people. An outsourcing company has to be able to provide what they say that they're going to do for their clients. And in the legal sort of outsourcing space, I think there's a twofold element in that it's typically the attorney that will agree to sign on with some of these things and work with some of these things. But then the role of that outsourced provider typically changes to not only working with the attorney, but also doing a lot of interfacing with that attorney's clients. So you want to know what type of experience someone has doing that, but keep in mind that it's not just you that they're talking to. It's your clients as well. So you want to know that company has really focused on getting the right people in the right spots so that they can treat your clients as if you were treating them over the phone or in person or something like that, because you want to maintain that level of quality. Also, you're not really spending the money in terms of productivity, recruiting and screening time or training time or even bad hires. That all goes back onto that outsourcer's shoulders because he or she has to sort through those things. So you will be making an investment to partner with them, but you're also saving some of these soft costs like recruitment and screening time. So that's kind of the upsides of outsourcing. And again, really the focus of all of this is just to try to find talented people and recognize how can we build our firm with the best people possible.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim, for sharing your knowledge. And I think this is a great refresher for anyone who has existing hiring processes in place or is starting a new firm and needs to know how to do it the right way right from the start. So we have some questions from our listeners. The first question is, everyone has a learning curve. How do I know when it's time to cut my losses and let someone go? I'd like to expand a little bit further on that question. We also hear a lot of times, is it appropriate to move a person from one position to another, or is it worth it putting a roadmap in place to try and get them over a hurdle to be successful in a position? How do you feel about those options?
I would agree that there's always a learning curve. The ramp-up time has got to be there. I think for me, and certainly the managers that I trust here at Total Attorneys, the litmus test is often we're on the fence about someone. You just got to ask yourself, if that person tried to come in today and quit, would I try to stop them? If the answer is no, then that person doesn't have a part of your future and they need to be terminated that day. And I don't mean to sound cold, but that should be a very, very clear indication to you as to when it's time to cut your losses. Now, in terms of moving somebody, I'm not always a fan of that. I think a lot of times it's just a tactic that's done to avoid not wanting to go through the negativity of firing someone. And if you're creating a position that didn't already exist, it probably didn't need to exist. It's just, again, a sidestep of a tough decision. So if you answer that question that, no, I wouldn't try to stop this person if they tried to quit today, moving them around is a terrible idea. Now, if you've met with this person over a period of months, kind of like a one-on-one to try to get them up and running, and notice that, well, they don't have a natural skill set for perhaps filing or organization or document creation for an attorney, but a really bubbly or effusive person is warm on the phone and stuff like that, okay, that might have some application. I just think it's dangerous ground to play on, and you should always be using that question, would I try to stop them if they quit? If the answer is yes, and they're not really particularly good at their role, then you can try to look at finding something else for them. But be careful of it. You know, it's something that we actually don't do here at Total Attorneys.
Okay. Do you have any tips on identifying the superstar during the interviewing process?
Yeah, I think for us, the easiest way is often when we're asking open-ended situational questions. Tell me about a time. Can you give me an example of? When was the last time you did X? If that person across from the table from me is able to give substantive answers in the form of a clear example of this one time I did this for my client and here was the outcome of it, I think that's a real good indicator that we've got someone with the right behaviors to do the job. Someone who can consistently come up with relevant examples of what they've done is typically someone who has those behaviors and will go ahead and act on them naturally once you bring them aboard. If you find that you're getting mostly theory from somebody, I would think that should set off an alarm bell. Make no mistake, people take classes on how to interview and get a job. Most college curriculums have some class that students have to take to learn how to give great answers to tough interview questions. There's a book called Great Answers to Tough Interview Questions. So you got to know that people are researching and doing whatever they can to give you the answers that you want to hear to give them the job. So if you're hearing a lot of this kind of theory as opposed to practical application, practical examples of having done it, or someone just saying, oh, I always do that, that's too thin for me. You know, and in those cases, you don't hire that person. So again, I would open-ended situational questions with great clear examples often identify someone as a superstar.
Okay. I'm interested in increasing my response rate. Does it make sense to create a new position to make immediate contact with prospects?
I think so. You know, what we've certainly seen, just some background on that, you know, Total Attorneys, and when we really first started working hard to expand the company, our focus was in high-performance marketing. And essentially what we did was generate inquiries from interested consumers for the attorneys we partnered with. And we learned pretty quickly that those attorneys that can not only make the calls to someone that said, I need some help, but also receive the calls when that person is being either hot transferred over or just calling in is absolutely critical. I mean, I really can't stress it enough, just because the attorneys that we've seen over the years who don't have the ability to take these calls or make them, you know, a lot of times they're wasting their marketing dollars. And if you don't have the time to take and make those calls, you know, you should really focus on a strong referral system and not spend money on marketing. But realistically, most folks are spending money on marketing, be it on the web, be it on newspapers, TV, or print ads in general, or whatever. However you're doing what you're doing to get people to ring your phone, it's critical that you capitalize on that money you spent to get someone doing that. So I think it makes sense to create a rule for that. I think that immediate contact when people call in is critical. But moreover, I think today's changing environment in the legal marketplace, so much happens on the web. And because there's a level of anonymity on the web, people are often in their first round of exploring what a lawyer can do for them, what their rights are, and that type of thing. Yeah, I think it's a little different from the old days of Yellow Pages ads when someone finally decided to call you. They may have been a little bit more motivated. What we found is that attorneys who can continue to go back and work their prospects, meaning someone's reached out to them, sent them an email, or made them a phone call, or to them, or something like that, having someone on staff to just go back and say that, you know what, you reached out to us however long ago. We wanted to let you know that it's our job as your attorney just to stay in touch since you contacted me. I want to see if you can help. If I can help you, I'm here to help you. You know, the sponsors that we work with, the clients that we have at Total Attorneys, often say that they get an additional 15 to 20% conversion on their marketing programs by having someone do that, be it them or a staff person. So I think it's incredibly important to do that, providing you take the time to just create the benchmark, make sure you ask the open-ended situational questions about who you need and not just what you need.
And I'd like to talk a little bit further about this question in particular. We talked about outsourcing today, and for a solo or a small firm attorney who may not have staff in his office 24 hours a day or on the weekend, making that immediate contact is so critical. Is this a situation that may lend itself better to outsourcing than others? And if so, you know, are there services available for criminal defense or DUI or consumer attorneys to use to handle those contacts when they're not in the office?
Yeah, I think certainly you got to take a look at your own practice. but I think having a virtual receptionist or an answering service is pretty key, particularly for when you're out of the office and at nights or on weekends. I do know from experience, and I've got some close friends who are criminal defense attorneys that find a lot of value from making themselves available via their cell phone, just because they know so many of their clients are going to be reaching out to them at all hours of the evening. However, we've also got a lot of bankruptcy attorneys who don't necessarily make their cell phone available, but they will have an answering service available because they know that so many of their clients are up late at night after the kids have gone to bed trying to make sense of these bills. Maybe it's not 2 or 3 in the morning, but at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, when they're most motivated to speak to an attorney, you want to make sure that that phone call just doesn't go to a voicemail system. Because more than anything, what that person wants on the other end of the line is to know that someone is there to listen to me, my request has been handled, and someone will follow up with me to help me with this problem. And there's so many different services that are out there, many of them very reasonable, that offer not only, call center type of service where they can take your calls and set appointments, but some even do outbound calls for you. And this kind of goes along those lines of if somebody else can do it, they probably should be. I think it's a perfect application for outsourcing simply because how realistic is it for you to have someone in your office between, say, 5 and midnight? Do you even want someone in your office from 5 to midnight when no one's there? Those are questions you got to ask yourself first. But let's take a look at who are my clients, when are they calling, and what does it cost to do one of these virtual receptionist or answering services, and measure it. See how many calls you're actually getting during those hours and how many clients you get for it, and most likely it'll pay for itself. If it isn't, don't do it. It was a worthwhile experiment, and now you know. But it's certainly worth exploring.
Great, and thank you all for joining us again today, and Tim for spending your time with us. You can watch for a recap email that you'll receive later this afternoon with a link to buildwiththebest.com that Tim mentioned, where a lot of these hiring practices originated. And we'll be happy to work with you again on our next Total Attorneys Power Chat coming up in August. Thank you all, and have a great weekend.